Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Read, Write, Local, Unbound, the summertime Tuesday evening show where we talk to authors and find out what makes them tick, what made them read, what made them write, and maybe some advice for some of you. I'm very pleased to this on our final episode of the summer series to welcome Monica Babcock. Monica lives right here in Avon Lake and has a number of publications out there and is going to be here tonight talking about how she got into this, what she's done, and hopefully answer some questions from you all too. So Monica, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks for having me. This has been a great event. As you know, I've joined a couple of them, and I appreciate you doing this.
In the background. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Well, the question. Let's start from the beginning. When you were young, what are some of the books that you like to read?
Well, I wasn't a real big reader, mainly because I was always daydreaming and making up my own stories in my head. I was constantly making up stories in which I was the star, of course. But I did read a couple. I remember reading, I liked The Black Stallion, and I liked Island of the Blue Dolphins, and I liked The Black Opal, which was a mystery. I remember I really liked that one. So I did read. But I really was more into just making up my own stories. I never wrote anything as a kid. I wrote a couple poems as a kid, but I never wrote a story as a kid. It went through my head too fast for me to write it down,
So they're kind of like dreams, perhaps, in some ways. They're things.
But, it's kind of funny because my mother told me later that she thought I was a little bit mentally handicapped because I would sit for hours and just sit there and stare, and she thought I was really slow, but I was just thinking of all these stories. Mm-hmm. And I was having all kinds of fun in my head, all this excitement. It just didn't show on my face, I guess.
And those stories weren't coming from anybody else's or borrowed, they're coming from you.
Yeah.
But can you remember anything about what some of those stories were like, or what?
Oh, I would be like a cowgirl riding on the range, and I'd be it was always something very dramatic. I'd be a princess in a tower, and it was always those kind of almost fairy tale kind of stories. So I'm sure that I plagiarized some of them in my head. But I mean, yeah, I just was constantly though thinking of stories, and it was just my imagination was my favorite toy, and I just was constantly, and I would do it in school. I would daydream in school, and I get in trouble for it sometimes, but I just couldn't stop the daydreaming.
So almost sounds like some Walter Mitty type stories about I was a princess, or I would, but not so much as it's just all internalized, I suppose.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. So and you also wrote poetry back then too. Were these poems that were kind of more oral ones, or did you write some of them down?
Well, you know what? I wrote them when I just remember I was like in 6th grade or something. I had to write a poem for school. Mm-hmm. And I don't even remember what it was about, but I wrote this poem, and my older sister, actually I was younger than that, I was probably like 4th grade. My older sister was 2 years older than I. Never had for the most part, sibling rivalry. She rarely said a nice thing to me, but she read my poem and she said, "This poem's really good." And I was like, my sister said that? And I remember thinking, oh, I can actually do something well, something that my sister admires me for. And so, and then when I got older, I used to entertain some of my coworkers by writing silly poems, like goofy, whimsical poems. And I just found out recently that a friend of mine who I've known for 30 some years still has them. I worked with her years ago. She still has them in a packet in her drawer. Oh, she kept them.
Worth saving, worth keeping for somebody,
I guess.
So then did you get on to, say in high school, did you do more writing then, or we had other career things in mind for yourself?
High school, I loved English and history class. I lived for English and history class, but I couldn't wait to get out of school. I didn't want to go to college at first. I wanted to get a job and make money and travel, so that's what I did. So I did go back to college so I was older. And then when I went back to college, I just happened to take a creative writing course at LCC, and it just opened everything up for me. It just, I wrote one of my short stories my teacher, who was Lou Suarez. I don't know if any of you know who Lou Suarez is, but he thought the story was so good. He said that I should enter it into the contest at LCC. And I won first prize for my story, for, this short story.
Well, I guess you put something like that on your resume. You ended up teaching creative writing at LCCC for some time, did you not?
I didn't. No, I taught writing, but not. I wish
composition
I could
and
have taught
writing.
Yeah, I taught composition, which was okay.
Mhm.
But I've never been one to enjoy. I've never been big on writing, enjoying. I mean, I could write an essay, but I don't really enjoy it. I much more prefer writing creatively. And so then I went on to John Carroll. I transferred to John Carroll, and at the time they did not have a creative writing major. They only had a creative writing minor. So I majored in English and minored in creative writing. Now they do have a major in creative writing. But anyway, that's what I did. And then I went on to get my graduate degree in English. And then I taught, there for a while. But that's how I got into it.
So you did your graduate degree at John Carroll then? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
And when I studied creative writing, I studied poetry under George Bilger, who's one of the best around. He was great. And then Phil Metris, I had classes with him too. And at first I was actually doing better writing poetry when I was in creative writing class. I was actually better at the poems than at the short stories, because it's hard for me to write a short story. I want to write a novel. I can never get it into a short story. So I did much better in the poetry. I felt that I was much more successful in the poetry. And I'm really glad I took the poetry, because it helped me in my prose writing, because I think it's very important in prose writing to have poetics in there. Like Toni Morrison's very poetic, Sebastian Barry, Pat Barker, all those really good writers, Louise Erdrich, they're all really poetic writers. And so I think it's really important to study poetry and write poetry if you're going to write prose, fiction.
Mm-hmm. So in your master's program, did you have like a thesis or some topic that you really pursued?
My master's thesis was actually in Shakespeare, and it was on my favorite character, Iago from Othello.
Okay.
I just love Iago. It was a comparison between the two villains, Iago and Richard III. Mm-hmm. And then I taught Othello for many years. Almost every semester I taught Othello while I was teaching, because I absolutely love that play. And I love the character Iago. He just fascinates me. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So after this, then during this, were you actually getting any stories published in anthologies or magazines, or just passed around?
I did get some published in the John Carroll Review, but to tell you the truth, I'm really lazy about that kind of thing. And I just kind of decided I'm lazy, and I also don't particularly enjoy being rejected. Okay. And so I thought, well, I'm just gonna get some of my favorite poems together, and I'm just gonna put them out there. And if somebody wants to buy them, fine. If not, so I put a little chapbook together of my favorite poems, and I put it out on CreateSpace back in 2013. Yeah, which is Amazon.
And that's the Heartscapes, right?
Yes. But I had this kernel of a novel burning in my head since like 2004. Mm-hmm. And finally I started writing it in 2011. Mm-hmm. And then it took me 7 years of writing, rewriting to get it to the point where I felt it was ready to put out there. And so then I also self-published that, which is Burden of Remembrance. At first I went on CreateSpace, but I really want to support local bookshops. And so I thought, well, that's just in competition with local bookshops. So then I put it out on Ingram Spark. So because I put it on Ingram Spark, then you can order it through your local bookshop, and your local bookshop then will get a benefit from it instead of just Amazon, who I don't particularly like. It's actually easier putting it on Amazon, but I have a philosophical problem with Amazon. I would really rather somebody gave the money to a local bookshop than Amazon.
Amazon doesn't need all of our money, do they?
Exactly. exactly. So now it's on Ingram Spark, and I don't make, I now make, less than $1 per book, but that's not what it's about anyway. I just want it out there. I'm not, any writer who's out to make money is, unless you're famous, you're not going to make money as a writer, but I just want to get it out there. And so I still would rather go through Ingram Spark.
Well, funny thing is, Ingram's part of the octopus too, in some ways, and that they ship all of Amazon's single copies.
True.
But the thing is that they do this program here, and I'm glad that there's other ways for the authors to buy these things of quantity. Sherry, I'm sure, is very familiar with when she published her book through Amazon, that we had to, at the time, we actually had to get a tax number for the Historical Society, or we would not be able to buy them wholesale. That kind of opened that whole can of worms, right, Sherry?
Wow.
But yeah, it was a bit of a schmozzle, but we did sell a lot of them, so it was worthwhile to get them at cost. So
yeah, and the publishing industry has always been, there's obviously, if you're a good writer, you'll get published, but well, you should get published, but there's always been a problem with publishing companies as far as, do you need to know somebody? Do you need to get the right agent? All that. So I honestly just didn't want to deal with it. So
you didn't even look into that whole industry thing. You just wanted to do this for your own satisfaction.
Yes,
you didn't go
that was it.
for agents or sending manuscripts out.
Right. That's it. I just thought, I'm just going to do it my way, and if people like it, great. If they don't, okay, I can deal with it. It's, So that's kind of how it is, and I think it's better because, again, unless you're somebody like Donna Tartt or Ian McEwan or Toni Morrison, you're not out there to make money anyway. So
only a very few authors are going to make money, just like a very few musicians or very few actors, I suppose.
Yeah, true. That's true.
Yes.
So
so you weren't worried about any of that stuff at all. You just did it because you love it. And I guess a lot of the authors I've met here, they do it for different reasons, but some of them yes, some of them no.
Well, I was very fortunate that I have a really supportive husband, and that he's been supporting me the whole time. Not just, not just monetarily, but constantly saying, if you want to do it, do it. If I have to, I've spent a lot more money than I've earned, and he has no problem with that. He's just 100% behind me. He says, just do what you do. So that's, if it weren't for him, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I needed his support, and he's always given it 100%. He's no like my biggest fan,
No doubt you've had support from some of your other friends, and we'll talk about what your book did in a little bit, and about the book itself. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I guess maybe what I'd like to do, maybe this is a good time to read a poem from your collection.
Okay, I will. This one, I wrote this. We were in North Carolina, and we were driving up the coast, and we just happened upon Atlantic Beach, and we saw this gorgeous beach, and we just got out of the car. We weren't really ready to go to the beach. We just decided to go. And I was sitting on the beach watching my husband and my son playing in the water. And I just sat there, and that's what this is about. It's called Boys of Summer. Atlantic Beach, North Carolina, June 5th, 2001. It used to be shampoo bubbles that got them going. The father kneeling by the tub, kneading the child's golden hair into a white froth, then plopping a dollop onto the tip of the upturned nose, or plowing the rubber duck shark-like through the billowing waves into the sudsy tummy. What a hoot that was, when his brown held no streaks of silver, only glints of gold. Now I am content to sit on the beach towel and watch my boys, ages 12 and 46, laughing and scooping shells from the ocean waves. It is time-lapse photography. The boy becomes the man, with such a tiny space of time between.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I remember hearing that several years ago when you were at our event, and just how moving that was. And I'm there again. Thank you. Of
Well,
time
thanks.
passing and family and love. Yes. Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now let's talk about Burden of Remembrance, the book you worked on for so long.
Yes.
And it's kind of it's a family story, a story of a community story. It's a story of war and a story of a terrible secret.
Yes. Yes. This is a story that started in 2004 in my head. What really, okay, a couple things triggered it. As far as the time frame, my mother was of the greatest generation. She was born in 1924. Okay, so she was always talking about what it was like in the 40s, and then when she met my dad, and talking about Cleveland in the 1940s, what it was like. She was always talking about it, and it fascinated me because I'm from Cleveland, and the stories are fascinating. But then my mother also, I found out that many of my mother's ancestors, my mother had very colorful ancestors, and a couple of her ancestors way back, a couple of the men abandoned their children. And I remember being really perplexed by that because, first of all, my own father, and he was just like Atticus Finch, exactly like Atticus Finch. He was very patient and loving, and I could never imagine him abandoning us. And so I always thought, what would it be like to be abandoned by your father, number one, and second of all, how can a father abandon his children? And so these themes run through, it seems like, all of my books, because now I'm on a third story, which is mystery, and these same themes keep popping up, these themes of abandonment, secrets, shameful secrets. And also the other theme that I'm really big on is PTSD, because I'm very, very much against war and the damage of war. And so this theme always comes up to this idea of PTSD and war. And so it seems like, my first two books, at least, they both deal with abandonment, betrayal, PTSD, shameful secrets, very flawed people, because I think very flawed people are interesting. And then family dynamics. They're always about family dynamics and how I don't want to say dysfunctional, but how all families have turmoil, and how do the individual people in the family deal with these turmoil. And so those things fascinate me. And so those kind of always pop up in my stories.
Yes, it seems I know an awful lot of people who are abandoned by their fathers, which again is something alien to my experience as well. But there's a lot of people in that situation. Also, World War II, PTSD. I don't think people really like to talk about it back then, about what they went through and what they saw. And a lot of people never talked about it. And it hurt them and probably other people around them because of that. Because you didn't do that.
Yeah, and even at the beginning of the post-Vietnam period, that's when this all came to light about PTSD. A lot of people said, "Oh, that's a bunch of hooey," and it wasn't until years later that even they got help.
Yes.
And so that whole thing, and of course, I remember that. I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War, so that kind of thing fascinates me. That I want to bring attention to it, I guess, to the damage that war causes, not just immediate damage, but the lasting damage to people.
That people can be trained to do these things, but that doesn't mean you can train somebody not to be human anymore. There's a backlash.
Yes, exactly.
So anyway, you just briefly mentioned your third book, and I think you talked about there's a second one that's coming out soon, you said, right?
Yes, if actually my cover design is coming along. So the cover is almost ready. I'm still waiting for 2 of my critical readers to get back to me
Mhm.
with their input. I'm thinking once I get their input, then I will definitely have to revise it again, but it's almost there.
Mhm.
I've been working on this one now for on and off. This was another one. It took me a long time to figure out how to frame it. But when I finally figured out how to frame it, it all fell together or fell apart, but it all came together. I'm thinking that was around, well, it was after, it was like 2018 when I was done with Burden of Remembrance. I've been working on about 3 years.
Well, let's put a pin in that book and the third one. We'll come back to them. I still
The
want to talk more
third-
about Burden of Remembrance.
Yeah.
So tell us about some of the characters in this book and where they come from. You were telling me you've done a lot of research, obviously, not just your own family experience, but to get things right about what happened in this period.
Yeah, you know my burden?
Yes, a Burden of
Yeah,
Remembrance.
okay. Yeah, it takes place in Cleveland. So I grew up in Cleveland. My parents were born in Cleveland. So a lot of the history I know, but I also looked up things like I checked everything to make sure that it was correct. Like even the color of her lipstick to make sure it was, like Revlon's. I can't even remember what it's called now, but I double checked and I checked to make sure that certain theaters, like the theaters in the area, were open, and restaurants. I wanted to make sure it was right, because I cannot stand when I read a book and there's something in there that's not historically correct. It drives me crazy. The other thing was I had to ask my husband for a lot of questions, because there's a lengthy part about guns, weapons, and I know nothing about weapons, nothing about guns. And my husband knows a lot about military history, but not so much about how to operate a gun. So he would explain to me about what would be appropriate as far as the military information. But then he said, well, you're going to have to look up about the gun, because I don't know enough about that. So I had to look all this stuff up. But I did the research. I couldn't just make it up. So, yeah. I looked up cars, information on cars. If I had any cars in there, I had to look it up. Make sure the color was right. I mean, I'm really meticulous about this stuff. I remember reading a book once. I won't say what the book was, but he was talking about Cedar Point, and it was in the 50s, and he mentioned the Blue Streak. Well, the Blue Streak wasn't built till 1964. No. And it really bothered me. I thought, he should look that up, He had it like in 1954 and it wasn't there then. And I knew that as a fact because I like Cedar Point. So I knew that, and that really bothered me. And I feel like if you don't check this stuff, your reader's not going to trust you,
Because they just think, well, you said it here for no particular reason, and you're making stuff up. And they're not just like train spotters who are looking for mistakes, like continuity errors in movies, because I know a lot of people love that. His shirt changed, but people do see these things, and it does bother them, and that's why continuity and all that, and movies getting the background, knocking anachronisms out of them, which even big budget movies fail to do a lot.
Yeah, that's the other thing. The language is really important to me, to make sure that it's period appropriate. So I would always use I use the language my mother and my grandmother used. Rather than how we speak now, because it's different,
Yes.
And so I used a lot of my mother's and grandmother's expressions in there, and yes, it's important to do that, I think. And and again, I looked up, like, if I have songs in there, I mentioned songs. I looked to make sure what year the song was released, who released it, So I was very meticulous about it. In movies, I have a couple of movies mentioned in there, and I made sure I checked that it indeed occurred at that time. So I did do that.
Speaking of time, your novel spans a number of decades as well. So you had a bunch of errors to contend with as your characters aged and grew up and passed through each other's lives. So yes.
Yeah, that's another thing when I'm writing a novel. I always have a big legal pad next to me, because I have to write the dates of birth and everything. That's another thing that drives me nuts. If I'm reading a book and the age it's like, no, that doesn't jive with, like you just said, 5 years passed and that's not the right age, So I made sure that, everything coincided with the passage of time, that I had the right age and all that too. So I had to do all that. But it's the only way you can keep track really of your writing. And they even name, a couple of times they changed names. And so then I had to go through and change all the names. And like a character's name I change, and then I have to go back and change all, change
Sure you
it
don't
through the
miss
whole
any. Yeah.
transcript. Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise it's
So-
what, who?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So
you got these characters loosely based, some of them on people you know or composites.
the only one that, I think, well, I'm a people watcher, okay, and I listen. I also listen to conversations going on around me. If I'm at a restaurant or something, I'm always listening to what people are saying, simply because I like to listen to the way people express themselves. And so, as far as the characters in Burden of Remembrance, Harvey, who's one of the main characters, he is based, loosely based on my grandfather. My grandfather was a very complicated, flawed, charming man. And so Harvey is quite a bit like my grandfather, but he's not my grandfather, but he's quite a bit like him. I think the main character, Grace, I think she reacts the way I would have reacted had I been in her shoes. For the most part, she's very, she says exactly what she thinks. She blurts things, sometimes to her detriment, but she doesn't have much of a filter, just like me. And she says what she thinks all the time. You know where you stand with Grace, and she lets you know. And I'm not sure I'd be quite as strong as she is. So she's a very strong person, but she definitely matures through the story. When the story starts, she's very immature. She's only 21 years old. She's very immature. And as the story progresses and she goes through all of these experiences, she does mature and she mellows to a point. But it's more maturity, and she becomes more accepting because she realizes that everything isn't black and white. Yeah.
Is there anything, say, big or important that you're trying to get across with this book? What is it you're really wanting to share with the world with it?
Well, I think the reason I wrote the book was to try to figure out the limits really of love and forgiveness, and just how far can someone transcend and still be forgiven. I think that's basically it. And Harvey transcends quite a bit. I mean, transgresses.
I'm thinking, yes.
Transcend
would be something else entirely.
Yes, exactly. He transgresses quite a bit. And so how far can he go and still be forgiven? I think that's kind of where I was going with it. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you had much feedback from people you don't know about the book, people who've read it, who found it at random?
Yeah, I have. I'm kind of surprised. I mean, I have had people who don't know me say, I really liked it. I've gone to about 3 book club meetings with that people I know have book clubs, but I don't know the people in the book club, and they say, yeah, I really liked your story. I really liked it. So yeah, I have had good feedback, which helps, because if it's just my friends saying it's good, it doesn't mean that much. But if it's a stranger saying, yeah, I really liked your book.
So these are book clubs or groups that all read your book
Yes.
together and discussed it, and then had you
Yes.
answer questions or whatever about it. So
yeah, and it was a lot of fun. I love going to book club meetings. I always tell them, that they could say whatever they want. They don't have to worry about hurting my feelings, but they actually just usually ask me questions more than anything, like, where'd you come up with it? The same kind of questions you're asking me, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we talk about what's upcoming then, your next book, and see how much this differs from Burden. And you've been working on it for a while, and it's coming out this fall yet? Maybe? Or
I'm
next
thinking
year?
I think it's gonna be next year.
Okay.
Yeah, it's based on the lives of my great grandparents. They emigrated as teenagers separately. They did not know each other till they came here, but they were Irish famine immigrants. They both survived the Irish famine and then came to America. And he ended up, again, here we go with the war thing, but he ended up fighting in the Civil War, and he was in terror. He was at, among other battles, he was at Second Manassas, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg, where he was shot. And the interesting thing is that I wrote to the National Archives, and they sent me like a 75-page packet, which contained all of his medical information, which was amazing. So I found out that he had what they termed irritable heart, which is PTSD. Anyway, so that fascinated me here again with the PTSD. And then there was a big gap that I could not figure out. So this book really is about, it's a weaving of the facts I know with my imagination. Of course, I don't know what their personalities were like, but I've woven their story, I've woven what I know into a story. And basically what happened was he was very physically and emotionally broken after the Civil War, just pretty much a wreck. And he struggled to support his family. And eventually he made a very desperate choice that had serious repercussions. And so that's what the story's about. And my biggest challenge with this story was, first of all, the frame. How am I going to present this story? So I decided I would have them each tell it's Julia and Samuel. So I had Julia and Samuel in alternating chapters telling their stories. And of course, they interweave at times and they diverge at times. But the biggest, aside from the framing, the really huge challenge was the language, because here we're talking about the 1860s, 1870s. They're Irish. Okay, so not only did we speak different in the 1870s, they're also Irish. So I had to make them sound as if they were Irish immigrants in the 1870s and 1870s America. So they have to have some Americanized sayings. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but they have to sound like they're Americanized to a point, but they also have to sound like they're Irish. They also have to sound like two completely different personalities. And so I researched the language very much. First of all, I read American language, letters from soldiers back then, so I could get the idea of the language. But then I also looked up the Irish language in the 1850s and how they spoke. A lot of Irish words, and we think of like words like malarkey and stuff. Those words didn't even exist back then. So I had to look up every single word I put in there. I had to look up under the Oxford English Dictionary to make sure that it was in fact used back then.
Yes, the usage is traced back there as to the first printed usage. So word.
Yes.
Yes.
So I had to do that as well. And it was fun. At times it was frustrating, but it ended up, after I got into it, it was fun. And so it took me quite a while though to get into the rhythm of it. I got his feel for him first, and then she but it took me a while to really to really connect with their voice. But once I got it, it came pretty clearly. Yeah.
So does this story spend time in Cleveland then, or were they?
No, it does. No, it does not.
Cleveland at all. Okay.
No, it's Philadelphia,
Mhm.
Gloucester City, New Jersey. And then, those are the two. What's fun though is that I visited both places because I had all these addresses. So we went to Philadelphia a few years back, and we went to most of the buildings are gone now, but we found where some of the hospitals were that he was, the military hospitals. We found out the locations of those. We also found some other areas where he lived, and we also went to Gloucester City, where I actually found my great-great-grandmother's house is still standing, which was really exciting. I actually saw her house. That was really exciting. I almost got out and went to the door to the people who
but you
lived
didn't
there
quite
and said,
do that.
my great great grandmother lived here, but I thought, nah, I better not do that. But I almost did. Yeah, but that was fun. Doing that, the research. And then of course I've been to Gettysburg, and I've been to Manassas, which is Bull Run. I've been there, and I've been to Chancellorsville. There's not much left of Chancellorsville, but I've been to those battlefields too. So that helped, you know.
Yes, fascinating. I mean, people could just make all this stuff up, or they could really do the legwork that you have done. Research and just being there, I think, is important, because you want to be there in the books.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it was weird going. It was really weird because I had been to Gettysburg a few times, but then once I found out he was shot there, I did all this research on where he actually was, and I found out that they had gone all the way down Baltimore Street to the square. And so that when I walked down the street, I was thinking, oh my gosh, these buildings were here when he was here. And it was a really strange experience, you know. I felt very close to him. Yeah, I did.
It's kind of like some of these, I'm not saying you're doing time travel books, but some of these things in that genre, it's about the place is permanent, the time is not. And people, you know, may remember this, or something may bring them back in time, you know, these all sorts of themes that and books certainly can take us backward and forward in time, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I'm working on that, so hopefully that'll be out by the beginning of next year. I mean, maybe sooner. But
you have a title yet?
Yeah, it's called A Melancholy Union.
Melancholy Union, okay.
A Melancholy Union, yes. Yes.
Well, we look forward to that. And you said you've already started writing a third one.
It's a mystery, which is it is a mystery story, not the story. It's a mystery, and I have to have something cooking all the time. So I didn't have any ideas for a new novel. So I looked through some of my old pieces, and I found this piece. It was like 4,000 words, and I thought, this is pretty good. You know, I think I'm going to go with this. And so I've been playing with it, and I've gotten to about 11,000 words on it. It's a mystery. It takes place in the Cleveland area again. It started
a period piece, or is it contemporary?
Yeah, it's contemporary, but she thinks back. She's 44 years old, but she thinks back to when she was 8 years old. Okay. The very first page, it describes how she comes home from school when she's 8 years old, and she finds her mother dead in their swimming pool. And so now she's 44, and her father just died, and so now all this stuff is kind of bombarding her, and she always thought, you know, when she was little, she thought, well, you know, it was an accident. Then when she got older, she wondered if maybe it wasn't suicide, because her little brother had died of leukemia about a year before, and her mother was very depressed by that. Then she worried it was suicide, but then she discovers something that maybe it was murder. So now it's almost like a cold case. It's actually a cold case.
It is a cold case, yes.
Yeah, and she's trying to find answers like 32 years later. And if it was murder, could it have been her father? Could it have been a neighbor? Who would it have been? And so, I'm not quite sure where I'm going with it. I'm sorry.
I was just sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
Does this come from a love or background? You like mysteries a lot, read a lot of them?
I do like mysteries. I don't read them exclusively, but I do enjoy a good mystery once in a while. Yeah, I definitely do. Although I think most good novels are mysteries in the sense that there's some
one kind or other. It's not just a body. There's some puzzle to be solved.
Exactly. Otherwise you wouldn't read to the end, because you want the answer to some type of mystery. But yeah, I do like good mysteries. I do enjoy them, and this one is this one though is again a psychological element. Mine always have psychological elements to it. She's dealing with her father wasn't again, the whole thing with the father. her father was very cold. And so she grew up basically on her own because her father was a workaholic, never home. And so from the age of 8, she was kind of on her own. And so when her dad died, she isn't really heartbroken about it because he wasn't ever much of a dad anyway. So again, she's going through all of this now. He just died, and she's going through his stuff, and she's trying to come to terms with her relationship with her father, what really did happen to her mother. And then there's the tragedy of the brother who died when he was little. And so all of this, and she has a family too. She has a husband, and she has twin sons who are 12 years old, who are opposites. They're absolute opposites of one another. But they're real close. They're inseparable, but they're opposites. And so she's dealing with these 12-year-old boys and her husband. And she's kind of, because of her mental state, she's kind of distanced herself from her husband. So she's got that going on. So again, we've got this whole idea of people in a family trying to
keep it together and themselves together.
Exactly. Yeah.
And maybe for all I know, I didn't write this book, but maybe there's some danger from the past that could threaten her family today. I mean, that's what I would put in there, but that's up to you.
Yeah. Well, just the idea of, I mean, she's dying now. She really needs to. And of course, she's an English adjunct because, well, she's not an adjunct exactly. She's kind of a little bit more than an English adjunct, but she's an instructor in English at a college because that's what I know and that's what she is. And so then I bring in the whole dynamics of English departments in college.
Wait, hold on. She's dying?
No, she's in the English department.
Okay, but I thought you said.
And so I'm sorry, I speak too fast.
Okay.
No, and so the dynamic of the English department and the egos that are going on there, because that's what happens in
academic
any department.
politics.
Exactly.
They're so bitter because the stakes are so small.
Exactly. I mean, so I got that going on too. So I got a lot of things going on. Yeah.
All right.
So we'll see what happens with that one. I don't know.
Looking forward to find out. There's so much to look forward to in the future from what you've written. Have you thought about publishing any more poems at any time?
I cannot write. I have tried to write a poem. Every once in a while I'll pick up, and I just cannot write a poem to save my soul. I think I don't think that's unusual. Somebody who was saying, weren't you saying that, Shelley, last week about how you because you said it, Shelley, that you'll write for a while and then you just dry. It'll just be dry for a while. Yeah, that's exactly. I've been dry for a long time with poetry, but I would like to get back to it at some point. Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, everybody's experience as a writer is different. But if there's people who think kind of like you do and have similar experiences, what would you recommend to those people who've got a book in them and want to do something about it? What would you tell them?
Well, first of all, if they haven't been to creative writing classes, take them, go to workshops. That's really where you get the best. You need feedback. You absolutely have to have feedback. So, creative workshops, as many as you can. If they take a creative writing, if they even get into creative writing as far as a program, great. But if they can't afford it, not everybody can afford to do that. Go to, writing workshops, get involved with writers groups. So, I got my minor in creative writing. So I took like 8 workshop classes. But then after, I've also been to some workshops, week-long workshops, and that's when you have to have feedback. It's also really good if you have a couple of really good readers to give you their honest opinion, even if it hurts. But yeah, you need to workshop. You cannot, I think it's almost impossible to just write without having some type of feedback from a workshop group. It's pretty impossible. I think a lot of,
especially if you go away for a week or something like that, I think there's a benefit to spending a lot of quantity and quality time with other writers, informally even.
Yeah, and writers tend to be, we're a little quirky usually, and so it's kind of fun to be around a whole group of quirky people for a week. It's just a lot of fun, Writers oftentimes are lonely because we cannot find other writers to understand us. Writers, I know that sounds weird, but
it doesn't.
Right? Yeah, it's hard for other people to understand your head. So if you meet a writer friend, my writer friend here, Marcia, she's a very good writer friend of mine. She's joined us. Yeah, we talk about writing all the time, and it's so nice because most of my friends, I can't talk about writing with them. They'll ask me about my book, but I can't talk about the writing process with them. So they wouldn't understand. They don't get it, you know.
Yes,
So.
other people who get each other getting together is, I think, what a lot of people are lonely for, especially since this whole pandemic thing. You know, that sometimes it's just hard finding your people. You can't get together in person.
Yes. Yes.
Well, at this point, I'd like to throw it open to our audience. If there's anybody there who'd like to ask a question or make a comment to Monica, unmute yourself and have at it. Anybody?
Monica, looking forward to your next book.
Thanks, Sherry.
I enjoyed the last one. I have to tell
good.
you that in reading it, I almost felt like a voyeur, like I was peeking into the most intimate details of people's lives and was feeling almost ashamed that I was so close to knowing this family. And that was an interesting experience.
Oh, thanks, Sherry. I appreciate that.
Also, I just saw in the comments here from Marcia, sorry about keeping my video off, working outside, you know, today, why are you working outside? But yes, we need people. I'm thinking that's writers need other writers and people need other people. So thank you for that feedback, Marcia.
Yeah.
Any other comments, shout outs?
Well, I'll go. Yeah, sorry about the video issue.
Thank you,
While I
Marcia.
was working outside is I'm crazy. And yeah, I just had so much to do. So that's fine. But in any case, I remember when one of the first conversations Monica and I had when I moved to Avon Lake and got to know her was down at that Rio coffee shop there. And we swapped some of our prose. And I'm a poet, you know, and trying to write prose, and Monica, I think, kind of walks in both genres really lovely and in a lovely way. And she said it really does help if you write prose to have a poetry background. And I was very inspired by that. And she pointed out some places in the draft that I had shared with her, how the prose did have a rhythm and a beauty to it. And I see the same thing in Monica's writing, the prose as well. And I would just say, Monica, I want you to write poetry, okay? Okay. Okay, I'm muting myself. I just want you to. I'll give you some exercises.
Okay, Marcia, you do that. Give me
All
some
right,
assignments.
bossy boots. Yep.
Yes, you will write poetry again soon enough.
Give me some assignments. You know, it's funny that you say that because I remember when I studied poetry under George Bilger, he would give us assignments. And I remember a couple of times he gave us assignments I really didn't want to do. And those turned out to be my best poems. And he said that. He goes, I'm going to give you assignments. And sometimes that's what happens. He says, you just force yourself to write something. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And that's true. If you have to fill an assignment, then you just have to do it. But
I think also just with certain formats of poems and things, like you say, you have a sonnet that you're going to write. They all have their style, but it's what you put in it that makes it unique. And sometimes you have to have that wireframe to fill in, huh?
Mm-hmm. It's true. Yes.
All right.
It's true.
Well, unless we have any more comments, it's probably time to wrap things up. So I'd like to thank you, Monica, for joining us tonight. And thank you to all of our guests who showed up to participate and to watch and bear witness. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jerry, and everybody for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yes, great. Thank you. Once again, I'm Jerry Bogle. This has been Read Write Local with Avon Lake Public Library. This is our final episode for 2021. So it's been a great ride. I thank everybody who's been a part of this. And I'm glad that you get to wrap this up here. Monica, thank you for doing that. So everybody have a good evening